It's funny. Usually when we talk about a toxic substance or like a poison, there's this expectation of mechanical precision.
Oh, absolutely. Like an engineering problem.
Right. Like you ingest something toxic, your stomach violently rejects it, and a doctor runs a very specific blood test.
They point at a chart and say, there it is.
Yeah, exactly. They say this is the exact mechanism of how it's harming you.
It's the comfort of the binary. I mean, cause and effect in a closed system. We desperately want human health to be this simple mathematical equation.
Like one bad variable equals disease.
Right. And removing it equals perfect vitality.
But then you step into the world of internet nutrition and, modern dietary advice, and that simple cause and effect machine just shatters completely.
Well, it's pure chaos.
Unadulterated chaos. And that really brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. For you, the ever-curious learner listening right now, we know you were trying to navigate this era of absolute information overload.
Especially regarding what you put on your plate every day.
Exactly. Where it feels like yesterday's superfood is today's literal poison. So today, we are unpacking a massive, highly specific, and frankly fascinating YouTube transcript.
It's from a channel called Haircafe.
Right. And it's a remarkable piece of media analysis.
It really is. The creator of the Haircafe channel meticulously dissects and, well, totally debunks a phenomenally viral video produced by another massive channel called What I've Learned.
And the core thesis of that viral video is staggering. I mean, it claims that seed oils, meaning your standard everyday canola, vegetable, and soybean oils, are literally shrinking the human brain.
And actively lowering our global IQs.
Okay, let's unpack this because I promise you this deep dive is going to go to some wild places.
We're looking at how a completely mundane household ingredient gets transformed into a supervillain.
Right, something sitting in your pantry right now. And to get to the bottom of this, we're going to examine everything from the history of World War II engine lubricants to the IQs of rhinoceroses.
Which is a real thing we're going to talk about.
Oh, we're definitely talking about rhino IQ and CT scans of 4,000-year-old Egyptian mummies and even something called the aquatic ape theory.
And what's truly fascinating here isn't merely the biochemistry of dietary fats, although we are definitely going to dive deeply into the cellular mechanics of that.
Right.
The broader thematic framework today is analyzing the exact anatomy of a modern health panic.
Like how scientific data is manipulated.
Exactly. Stripped of context, repackaged, and then sold to millions of people online.
So let's start with the origin of the panic. Because looking at this transcript, it points out a sociological shift that is so incredibly relatable.
Think back 20 years, nobody talked about seed oils.
No. They were completely benign. I mean, if they were mentioned at all, they were just a slightly boring cooking ingredient.
Or maybe a heart-healthy alternative to dropping a solid block of lard into your frying pan.
Right. But then, somewhere around the late 2010s to early 2020s, the internet collectively decided that seed oils are the ultimate biological evil.
The transcript compares this sudden shift to the massive gluten-free fad that took over the early 2010s.
Oh, man. Remember how that happened? Before that book Wheat Belly came out, the only time anyone ever mentioned gluten was in the context of celiac disease.
Which is an autoimmune condition that affects roughly 1% of the global population.
Exactly. But then, almost overnight, everyone decided they had a generalized intolerance, and every single restaurant had to have a gluten-free menu.
The comparison is highly instructive. It demonstrates how a specific, complex dietary component can go from total obscurity to ubiquitous infamy in a matter of months.
But unlike the gluten panic, which you could, trace back to a handful of specific best-selling diet books, the anti-seed oil movement on social media feels more insidious.
Yeah, it wasn't one book. It was a slow seepage into the algorithm.
And what's wild about this transcript is that Haircafe actually manages to dig back into the Paleolithic era of YouTube to find the genesis of this specific online panic.
They trace the rhetoric all the way back to a video from 2007.
Wait, 2007? YouTube was basically just cat videos back then.
Pretty much, but there was a video titled, "Are Vegetable Oils Good for Us?" by a health influencer named Sean Croxton.
You ran a channel called Underground Wellness, right?
Yes. And that specific 2007 origin point is crucial because it highlights the psychological architecture of these movements.
Okay, lay that out for me.
Well, Croxton was charismatic. He spoke with absolute unwavering conviction, and he laid out a narrative that vegetable oil consumption had tripled, saturated fat consumption had plummeted, and heart disease was skyrocketing as a direct result.
But the transcript says the most important element wasn't the data, right?
Exactly. It was the psychological empowerment of the messaging.
How so? I mean, it's just a guy talking about cooking oil.
It was framed entirely as a rebellion. It's the appeal of forbidden knowledge. Look at the name of the channel.
Underground wellness.
Right. The subtext, and often the actual text, tells the viewer the mainstream medical establishment, the FDA, the massive pharmaceutical companies, they are all lying to you.
They're actively making you sick for profit.
But we have rediscovered the ancient hidden truth. Eat butter, consume lard, reject the modern industrial agricultural machine.
So it flatters the audience.
Yes. It makes the viewer feel like an elite, independent, free thinker who has somehow broken out of the matrix.
Wait, so is being anti-establishment in nutrition basically following the exact same psychological rules as being into underground music?
What do you mean?
Like, once a band, or in this case a diet, gets popular and mainstream, it loses its cool factor. So you need a new, obscure thing to be furious about.
It's the exact same sociological mechanism. It is the commodification of the counterculture.
Which brings up a massive irony that the transcript highlights. The whole eat raw butter, drink unpasteurized milk, gorge on massive ribeyes aesthetic is now a multi-billion-dollar industry of its own.
Oh, absolutely. You have thousands of influencers selling premium supplements.
Specialized cooking courses, ancestral lifestyle brands.
They have become the very establishment they claim to be fighting against.
Yes. The true counterculture today, the real punk rock move, if you want to be a rebel, is actually just agreeing with the boring, peer-reviewed scientific consensus.
It's true. You don't get to call yourself a brave rebel anymore just because you eat butter. It is completely mainstream on the internet.
And it's moved way beyond just internet subcultures.
Right. It has reached the highest levels of global public discourse.
The source material specifically details how deeply this anti-seed oil, pro-saturated fat ideology has penetrated our culture, even reaching into politics.
Yes. It notes, for example, that political figures like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. have become highly vocal anti-seed oil propagandists.
And cholesterol denialists.
Right. And on the flip side, it points out the fascinating contradiction regarding Donald Trump, who frequently consumes heavily processed fast food.
Which is predominantly cooked in the very seed oils being demonized.
Exactly, while famously utilizing a statin drug to manage his cholesterol levels.
And we need to pause right here. For you, the listener, it is absolutely crucial to state that we are merely reporting the contents of the source material impartially.
We do not take any sides.
No, we are emphatically not endorsing the viewpoints, the political platforms, or the dietary habits of any political figures mentioned.
We are simply examining this transcript to understand how a specific nutritional argument has evolved from a niche 2007 YouTube video into a massive cultural talking point.
Precisely. We are acting as neutral observers of the information ecosystem. So with that psychological groundwork laid, let's actually dig into the cellular biology that sparked this whole thing.
Let's do it.
Because the original 2007 fear was entirely centered on the heart. The claim was beautifully simple. Vegetable oil consumption went up, saturated fat went down, and as a direct result, heart disease exploded into a modern epidemic.
When you hear it presented with a clean line graph, it feels like undeniable common sense.
It feels like common sense until you examine the actual epidemiological data.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the foundational premise of that argument is demonstrably false.
Okay, how so?
When we look at the raw data presented in the transcript, the hammer drops. Over the past 50 years, the incidence of age-adjusted heart disease mortality has actually plummeted.
Wait, plummeted? But you hear constantly in every public health campaign that heart disease is the #1 killer. How can both be true?
Well, it remains a massive cause of mortality, but the rates at which people die from it at specific ages have decreased significantly since their peak in the mid-20th century.
Okay, I see.
And a massive portion of that decline is due to advancements in modern medicine, specifically the introduction and widespread use of statin drugs.
Let's break down exactly how statins fit into this, because the influencers seem to ignore them entirely when looking at the timeline.
Statins were first introduced to the public in 1987.
By Merck, right?
Yes, by Merck. To understand why they disrupted the influencer's timeline, we have to look at the mechanism. Statins work by inhibiting a specific enzyme in the liver called HNG-CoA reductase.
That's a mouthful. What does that enzyme do?
It plays a central role in the production of cholesterol. So by blocking it, statins drastically lower LDL cholesterol. The low-density lipoproteins, often referred to as bad cholesterol, by anywhere from 25 to 35%.
Wow. And less LDL in the blood means less material to build up as plaque in the arteries.
Exactly. They have been studied in trials involving hundreds of thousands of patients, and the results are incredibly robust. They reduce the frequency of fatal heart attacks by roughly 25 to 30%.
So the narrative that heart disease skyrocketed alongside seed oil consumption completely ignores the pharmacological reality of the late 20th century.
It completely ignores it.
So just to get the timeline straight, as a society, we swapped a lot of saturated fat for seed oils, and we introduced statin drugs, and actual heart disease mortality rates fell.
That is the documented medical reality. Furthermore, the transcript pulls from numerous randomized controlled trials demonstrating that the consumption of omega-6 fatty acids, which is the primary component of seed oils, actively reduces the risk of coronary events.
Wait, it reduces it?
Yes. And on the specific topic of inflammation, which is the favorite buzzword of internet dietitians.
Oh, everything causes inflammation according to the internet.
Right. But systematic reviews of human trials show that linoleic acid, the main fat in seed oils, does not increase systemic inflammatory markers in the blood.
So it's not inflammatory.
In fact, in many controlled settings, it actually lowers them.
But what really blew my mind reading this source is the historical amnesia of the anti-seed oil movement.
It's quite something.
They make this audacious claim that before the invention of industrial seed oils, heart disease basically didn't exist. There's a specific claim in the debunked video that the very first heart attack wasn't even recorded in medical literature until 1912.
Which is an astonishing, almost comical misinterpretation of medical history.
What actually happened in 1912?
The paper they are referencing was written by a physician named James Herrick. He wasn't discovering the first heart attack. He was describing the clinical features of coronary thrombosis in a living patient.
Proving that a localized blockage in an artery wasn't immediately and universally fatal.
Exactly. He was advancing diagnostic understanding, not witnessing a brand new disease magically appearing in the human species.
Right. And the Haircafe transcript brings absolute receipts to prove that atherosclerosis is ancient. They bring up actual CT scans performed on 4,000-year-old Egyptian mummies.
And ancient Peruvian remains.
Yes. These are people who obviously never saw a plastic bottle of canola oil in their lives. Their diet was intensely local and ancient.
And what did the high-resolution imaging show?
34% of these ancient mummies had clear calcified atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries.
And their average age of death was estimated to be in their 40s.
That is severe premature heart disease by today's standards.
The historical and archaeological record is saturated with evidence. The transcript highlights 7th century Arabic medical poems that vividly describe the agonizing chest pain of angina.
Wow, 7th century.
If we look to the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci was performing autopsies and meticulously mapping out hardened, blocked atherosclerotic arteries in the 1400s.
Da Vinci saw it too.
The phenomenon of sudden cardiac death was explicitly described by Hippocrates in the 4th century BC. This disease has stalked humanity for our entire existence.
I always assumed it was a modern lifestyle disease, though.
Yeah.
So if the mummies had it and Da Vinci saw it, why does it feel like everyone is suddenly dying of heart disease in the modern era?
That's a great question.
Like, why didn't it seem like an epidemic in the 1800s?
To understand that, we have to look at the mechanics of human demographics and the history of infectious disease.
Okay.
For the vast, overwhelming majority of human history, the leading causes of death were infectious. Tuberculosis, cholera, influenza, simple bacterial infections from minor wounds.
Right, before antibiotics.
Before the widespread deployment of antibiotics in the mid-20th century, you were statistically much more likely to die of a bacterial infection in your 30s than you were to survive long enough to have a fatal myocardial infarction in your 70s.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going. Atherosclerosis isn't something you catch. It's a progressive, age-related mechanical failure.
Precisely. The process of LDL cholesterol penetrating the endothelium of the artery, macrophages arriving to consume it, turning into foam cells, and slowly building a calcified plaque that takes decades.
Decades of wear and tear.
During the 20th century, the germ theory of disease, sanitation, vaccines, and antibiotics effectively neutralized the things that used to kill us young. Life expectancy rocketed from the 40s and 50s up into the 70s and beyond.
We simply started living long enough for our cardiovascular plumbing to finally wear out and clog up. It wasn't the introduction of vegetable oil, it was the eradication of tuberculosis.
Exactly. But once the overwhelming weight of cardiological data and the success of statins made it nearly impossible for influencers to keep blaming seed oils for heart attacks, the panic merchants found themselves in a difficult position.
The narrative was collapsing.
They needed a new villain, or rather, a new victim.
Right. Because if you can't scare people about their hearts anymore because the stats are visibly against you, what's the next scariest organ to lose?
Your mind.
Exactly. You can measure a blocked artery with an angiogram, but how do you measure something as vague as brain fog?
Which seamlessly brings us to the brain. And the core claim of the specific, what I've learned, video that our source is meticulously tearing apart.
Right. The viral video frames seed oils as a $212 billion food ingredient poisoning our brain.
That's quite the hook.
Seriously. Their central, terrifying argument is that the average American is now consuming roughly 720 calories of seed oil every single day.
720.
And they claim this specific chemical structure is literally shrinking our brain mass and making the human race measurably dumber.
And the ultimate proof they offer to their millions of viewers.
A recent documented drop in global IQ scores.
This is a textbook example of confusing correlation with causation, and doing so selectively. Let's examine the timeline logically.
Okay, let's play with the timeline.
The influencer claims the mechanism is simple. Seed oils destroy intelligence. If we look at history, industrial seed oil consumption began rising in the 1910s and 1920s with products like Crisco.
Right, shortening.
And then it absolutely skyrocketed in the 1960s and 70s when the American Heart Association began officially recommending polyunsaturated fats over saturated animal fat.
Okay, so if their biological theory holds true, and seed oils literally shrink brain tissue, global IQ scores should have plummeted disastrously throughout the entire 20th century.
We should have seen a massive cognitive decline.
But we didn't, did we?
The exact opposite phenomenon occurred. This is a well-documented sociological and psychological phenomenon known as the Flynn effect.
The Flynn effect.
Yes. From the 1920s straight through to the early 2000s, the exact era when global seed oil consumption was experiencing its most dramatic hockey stick growth, American and global IQ scores rose tremendously.
Wait, how much is tremendously?
We are talking about an average sustained increase of nearly 30 IQ points across populations.
30 points. That's the difference between average intelligence and being classified as gifted.
Yes. The Flynn effect theorizes that better childhood nutrition, the elimination of lead paint, and most importantly, the rise of modern education systems that train the brain in abstract hypothetical problem solving led to a massive expansion in cognitive performance on these specific standardized tests.
Wow.
If seed oils intrinsically shrink brains and destroy our capacity for intelligence, that massive century-long 30-point rise in IQ occurring at the exact same time is completely scientifically inexplicable.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here, because the influencer isn't just making things up entirely. They point to a very specific recent study showing that IQ scores are currently driving.
Yes, they cite a Norwegian study.
Right. If millions of people are eating a highly processed industrial fat, and suddenly a national intelligence metric drops, why shouldn't I immediately assume they are connected? It feels like common sense.
It's vital that we genuinely grapple with that fear because a drop in a national IQ metric is statistically significant. But we must look at the methodology of the Norwegian study they are citing.
Okay, what did the researchers actually do?
They analyzed the IQ scores of young men during mandatory military conscription over several decades. They did find a decline for cohorts born after roughly 1975.
So there was a drop.
But you have to look at the magnitude and the author's own conclusions. The drop is about 2 points over a 20-year period.
2 points. Okay, a 2-point drop across an entire nation is statistically real? But is it biological? Like, are their brains actually shrinking?
The authors of the very study the influencer cites do not believe so.
Really? What do they blame it on?
The researchers explicitly state in their paper that the decline is overwhelmingly likely due to environmental factors, not a sudden genetic mutation or a specific dietary fat shrinking the physical brain.
Like what environmental factors?
They point to changes in the quality of the educational system, massive shifts in media exposure and screen time, and a shift toward generally poorer overall dietary patterns.
Poor overall diet, meaning what?
Meaning an excess of empty caloric energy and highly processed sugars, not the specific molecular structure of linoleic acid.
And isn't it a bit absurd to pin a 2-point 2-point drop in test-taking ability purely on cooking oil when we consider the technological shifts since 1975.
It's quite a leap.
We literally carry supercomputers in our pockets, designed by thousands of engineers to hijack our dopamine receptors and obliterate our attention spans. The Haircafe transcript makes a great point here, arguing that algorithmic social media brain rot is a vastly more plausible mechanism for declining sustained attention test scores than the presence of soybean oil in a salad dressing.
It's a highly plausible alternative hypothesis, and there is an incredibly fascinating nuance buried within the modern intelligence data that the transcript brings to light.
What's that?
While overall IQ scores might be showing a slight stagnation or decline in some specific subsets, there is one specific metric of cognitive ability that is actually still going up.
Oh, it is.
3D spatial reasoning. And cognitive researchers largely credit that continuous rise to the massive global popularity of complex, three-dimensional video games.
Are you telling me that playing The Witcher 3 or Minecraft is actively improving our 3D spatial reasoning?
The data strongly suggests that navigating complex, simulated 3D environments provides intense cognitive training for that specific area of the brain.
So playing video games measurably improves spatial reasoning. But sitting around watching fear-mongering YouTube videos about cooking oil might actually be contributing to the decline in critical thinking.
The irony is staggering.
It really is. But let's look at the influencer's methodology again. If you are going to aggressively blame a recent 2-point drop in IQ purely on seed oils, scientifically, you have to also credit seed oils for the 30-point rise in IQ over the preceding 80 years. You can't have it both ways.
Exactly. You cannot selectively apply a single variable only when it supports your preconceived conclusion.
But the influencer's video doesn't just stop at recent Norwegian military conscription tests.
No, they go much further.
To truly sell the audience on the idea that seed oils are unnatural brain shrinkers, they attempt to build a massive, overarching evolutionary narrative.
And this is where the transcript uncovers some truly astonishing biological illiteracy.
Yes. The influencer attempts to construct a grand evolutionary framework to justify their dietary bias.
It's a very common, highly effective psychological tactic in the diet space. Appeal to an imagined, pristine, perfectly adapted ancestral past.
Right, the whole ancestral diet thing. The theory they present to their millions of viewers goes exactly like this. Human brains were small for millions of years. Then, about 2 million years ago, our hominid ancestors started eating massive amounts of seafood.
Specifically, seafood rich in DHA, which is a specific type of omega-3 fatty acid.
The claim is that hominids needed massive direct consumption of dietary DHA to physically construct bigger brains, and that eating linoleic acid, the omega-6 found in seed oils, somehow biologically blocks this magical DHA absorption today.
And right there, we encounter a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of how biology and evolution actually function.
The transcript brilliantly dismantles this.
It does. The influencer is essentially arguing that a primitive hominid ate a fish. The DHA in that specific fish physically made their individual brain larger during their lifetime, and then they passed that newly enlarged brain down to their children.
Like, I eat brain food, my brain gets physically bigger, my baby is born with a bigger brain. It sounds so intuitive, like leveling up in a role-playing game.
Intuitive, perhaps, but it is scientifically false. What the influencer is describing is not Darwinian evolution. They are describing Lamarckian evolution.
Let's really break down Lamarckian evolution, because this seems to be the core flaw in almost all of these internet diet theories.
Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was a French naturalist who proposed a theory of evolution prior to Charles Darwin.
Okay, what did he think?
Lamarck theorized that organisms can pass down physical traits that they acquire during their lifetime through use or disuse. The classic textbook example is the giraffe.
The giraffe's neck, right.
Yes. Lamarck would argue that an early short-necked giraffe stretched its neck every day to reach higher leaves. Its neck physically lengthened over its lifetime due to that stretching, and it then passed that elongated neck directly to its offspring.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm getting how absurd this is applied to humans. That is exactly like saying if I decide tomorrow to dye my hair platinum blonde and then I go out and get full-sleeve tattoos on both of my arms, my biological child will be born with platinum blonde hair and a sleeve tattoo.
That is a perfect analogy. The traits you acquire through your environment or your actions do not alter the germline DNA in your sperm or eggs.
Right. My DNA didn't change just because I altered my physical body. So how does Darwinian natural selection, the actual mechanism of evolution, explain the expanding human brain?
Natural selection operates on random genetic mutation and environmental pressure. A primitive hominid is born with a random genetic mutation that results in a slightly larger, slightly more neurologically dense brain.
Okay.
That larger brain requires immense calories, which is known as the expensive tissue hypothesis, but it also allows that hominid to build better tools, communicate more effectively, and outsmart predators.
So they survive longer.
Exactly. Because of those advantages, that specific hominid survives longer and has more children than the hominids with smaller brains. That is how the trait is passed on and becomes dominant in the population. The environment selects for the mutation.
Got it.
Gorging on a specific fatty acid does not mutate your DNA to give your descendants larger skulls.
So the whole premise that fish directly grew our brains and we passed it on is just biologically illiterate. And honestly, the way the influencer tries to prove this DHA theory by comparing human intelligence to animal intelligence is genuinely hilarious.
The cross-species comparisons in the influencer's video represent an exceptionally flawed understanding of animal cognition and encephalization quotients.
The influencer literally looks at the camera and claims that rhinoceroses are dumb. They argue rhinos have tiny walnut-sized brains compared to their massive bodies, specifically because they eat a plant-based diet, which happens to be high in linoleic acid.
Oh, wow.
And then they point to dolphins, claiming dolphins are geniuses purely because their diet is primarily fish, which is high in DHA. Therefore, fish equals smart, plants equal dumb.
It is a profound, almost childlike misunderstanding of animal biology.
First of all, the transcript notes that rhinos aren't dumb. Animal behaviorists point out they have complex territorial memories, they recognize subtle danger zones, and they display complex emotional states.
They're highly adapted to their environment.
But let's look at the gaping hole in the influencer's logic. What about elephants?
Ah, yes.
Elephants are massive herbivores. They consume largely the exact same plant-based linoleic acid-rich diet as a rhinoceros. And yet, elephants are notoriously, famously brilliant.
They possess incredible long-term spatial memories.
Highly complex matriarchal social structures. They mourn their dead. They use tools. They could even be taught to paint.
The plant diet clearly didn't shrink the elephant's brain. And conversely, if we follow the influencer's logic that a high DHI fish diet automatically generates hyperintelligence, we must look at bears. Bears, particularly species like the grizzly or Kodiak, consume enormous amounts of wild salmon. They are gorging on pristine, natural DHA for months out of the year.
Oh, that's a great point.
They are certainly intelligent animals, but they aren't communicating in complex syntactic languages, building cities, or launching rockets into space.
Right.
Evolution is driven by highly specific environmental pressures, social dynamics, and natural selection, not by the magical consumption of brain-growing nutrients. We evolved big brains because we needed to out-cooperate and out-compete other hominids and predators on the savanna, not because we stumbled upon a sushi buffet.
But the influencer doubles down. When the standard evolutionary timeline doesn't support their DHA obsession, they bring up something called the aquatic ape theory to prove we are biologically destined to eat seafood. I had never even heard of this until I read the transcript.
The aquatic ape theory is a fascinating artifact of pseudoscience. It is a highly controversial, overwhelmingly debunked fringe theory within anthropology.
The theory apparently claims that humans actually evolved in a semi-aquatic environment, wading in shallow coastal waters. And the influencer uses this to explain human anatomy.
How do they attempt to do that?
They claim we lost our thick body hair, unlike chimpanzees, so we could swim faster and reduce drag. And they claim we evolved protruding noses instead of flat ape noses to act like a diver's mask and keep water out of our nostrils when we swim.
The transcript expertly dismantles every tenet of this. First, on a purely anatomical level, humans do have body hair. We actually have roughly the same number of hair follicles as a chimpanzee.
Wait, really? The same amount?
Yes. Our hair is simply much finer and shorter. It's an adaptation for sweating and thermoregulation on the hot savanna, not for swimming.
And what about the nose shape?
Anthropologists and evolutionary biologists widely agree that human nasal morphology adapted to climate and thermoregulation, not aquatic diving.
How does that work?
The nasal cavity contains structures called turbinates that warm and humidify the air we breathe before it hits our delicate lungs. Narrow, highly protruding noses are adaptations for warming and humidifying incredibly cold, dry air.
Which is why they're predominantly found in human populations that evolved in higher, colder latitudes.
Exactly. Flatter, wider noses are highly efficient adaptations for hot, humid, tropical climates where the air doesn't need to be warmed. It is basic thermodynamics, and it has absolutely nothing to do with diving for oysters.
The influencer even tries to use a modern, living group of people to prove this. They bring up the Bajau people who live in the Philippines and Indonesia.
Ah, the free divers.
Right, they are famous for being incredible free divers, spending hours a day underwater hunting for fish. The influencer points out, look, the Bajau have massively enlarged spleens that store extra oxygenated blood, allowing them to hold their breath for up to 10 minutes. This is living proof of the aquatic ape.
But once again, the influencer gets the actual mechanism of evolution completely backward. The biology of the Bajau people's spleen is a breathtakingly perfect example of Darwinian natural selection, not Lamarckian diet evolution.
Let's break down the spleen thing. How does a bigger spleen help you hold your breath?
When humans dive underwater, we experience hypoxia, a lack of oxygen. The body triggers the mammalian dive reflex. The spleen acts as a reservoir for oxygen-rich red blood cells.
Okay.
During a deep dive, the spleen forcefully contracts, dumping those extra red blood cells into the circulatory system, effectively giving the diver an internal oxygen boost.
So a bigger spleen equals a bigger internal oxygen tank.
Exactly. Now, over thousands of years living in that specific coastal environment, individuals within the Bajau population who randomly carried genetic mutations for slightly larger spleens were better at diving.
And because they were better at diving, they could gather more food, survive longer, and successfully raise more children.
Yes. The specific genes for larger spleens were selected for by the rigorous demands of their environment. A sedentary person from an inland culture couldn't just move to the coast, eat sushi for 10 years, and magically grow a massive spleen to pass on to their children.
Okay, so if we don't need a diet exclusively of fish to grow our massive brains, and if evolution doesn't work like a video game where eating a specific item gives you a permanent stat boost, where does this magical DHA actually come from?
This raises an incredibly important question about the actual fundamental cellular biology of the fats we consume.
Right, and why are internet dietitians so intensely, violently afraid of linoleic acid?
Let's strip away the grand evolutionary storytelling, forget the hominids for a moment, and look at the biochemistry. Within the human diet, there are only 2 fatty acids that are scientifically classified as essential.
Essential in a biological context, meaning our bodies cannot manufacture them from scratch? We must consume them in our diet, or we will eventually suffer a deficiency and die.
Correct. Those 2 essential fatty acids are linoleic acid, which we abbreviate as LA, which is an omega-6 fatty acid.
All right, that's the first one.
And the second is alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid. That is the complete list. Every other structural fatty acid your body requires, it can synthesize intricately from those 2 base components.
Let's dig into the chemistry. What makes an omega-3 an omega-3?
It refers to the molecular structure. In an omega-3 fatty acid, the first double carbon bond occurs at the 3rd carbon atom from the omega or tail end of the molecular chain.
And an omega-6?
In an omega-6, that first double bond is at the 6th carbon. It's a slight structural difference, but it dictates how the body's enzymes interact with them.
And here is where the biology gets really elegant and where the influencer's argument completely falls apart. The human body takes ALA, the plant-based omega-3, and uses specific enzymes to naturally convert it into the famous brain-boosting DHA.
Yes. The body uses enzymes called elongases and desaturasses to lengthen the carbon chain and add double bonds, constructing DHA directly from the base ALA.
That's incredible.
And simultaneously, your body takes linoleic acid, the heavily demonized omega-6 found abundantly in seed oils, and uses those same enzymatic pathways to convert it into something called arachidonic acid, or AA.
And the transcript points out a massive glaring hypocrisy here. The influencer sings the praises of DHA all day long. They call it the ultimate brain food, absolutely critical for the neurological development of babies.
But they completely, utterly ignore arachidonic acid.
Exactly. And according to the actual scientific literature, AA is equally essential for neurological development, cell signaling, and the physical construction of brain tissue.
They are 2 sides of the exact same developmental coin. A developing human brain requires vast amounts of both DHA and AA to construct healthy neural pathways and cellular membranes.
So you biologically need both.
Yes. But because AA is synthesized downstream from linoleic acid, the influencer must ignore its existence to maintain their anti-seed oil narrative.
Which brings us to perhaps the most jaw-dropping revelation in the entire transcript, the data on human breast milk and baby formula.
This part is truly illuminating.
I want to use an analogy here to set the stakes. Think about the building codes required for constructing a skyscraper in a major earthquake zone. You don't just guess what materials might work. The engineering regulations are intensely strict, mathematically precise, and heavily enforced because human lives are immediately on the line.
The manufacturing of infant formula operates on that same level of rigor.
It is one of the most highly regulated, scrutinized food substances on the planet. The FDA does not mess around with the exact chemical composition of what infants consume.
Absolutely. The nutritional profile must be exactingly calibrated to ensure survival and optimal development. There is zero room for nutritional fads in infant formula.
The anti-seed oil influencers on social media constantly scream that commercial baby formula is toxic sludge, specifically because the ingredient list includes vegetable oils.
But the transcript asks the crucial question.
Right. Why does the FDA federally mandate that specific vegetable oils be included in infant formula? Because the entire scientific goal of formula is to perfectly mimic the macro and micronutrient profile of natural human breast milk.
And it turns out, when you analyze human breast milk, the fat content is made up of 23 to 28% linoleic acid.
Let me just repeat that, 23 to 28%.
It is a stunning, undeniable biological fact that completely obliterates the narrative that linoleic acid is an unnatural, modern industrial poison. It is, quite literally, a fundamental building block of mammalian life.
So over a quarter of the fat a human mother naturally synthesizes in her body to grow her baby's brain is the exact same fat found in a bottle of canola oil.
Yes.
Let me wrap my head around that. If the FDA actually listened to these viral internet influencers, bowed to the social media pressure, and strictly removed all seed oils from baby formula, what would happen?
It would be catastrophic. It would quite literally be fatal.
Yeah.
Infants raised exclusively on that formula would rapidly develop essential fatty acid deficiency. They would suffer severe dermatitis, failure to thrive, hair loss, and profound neurological and physical developmental failures.
Wow.
It is incredibly scientifically irresponsible for influencers to aggressively fearmonger about a chemical compound that is biologically required for human survival.
And it's not just essential for babies. The transcript pulls data regarding the health outcomes of linoleic acid in adults. And this isn't just one guy guessing. They cite massive recent meta-analyses.
Yes, meta-analyses are crucial here. Instead of looking at one tiny study, a meta-analysis aggregates the data from dozens of rigorous studies, looking at hundreds of thousands of human subjects over years.
And what did they find?
When researchers analyzed the blood levels of linoleic acid in these massive populations, they found that higher levels of linoleic acid do not cause disease. They actually correlate with significant reductions in cardiovascular disease mortality.
Significant reductions.
Massive reductions in stroke risk, and a reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
So it's not just a benign calorie. It's not just not bad for you. Higher levels of this fat in your blood are actively, measurably protective against the very diseases the influencers claim it causes.
The clinical science is remarkably clear and consistent on this point.
So if the deep cellular biology proves that these fats are essential for survival, and the massive epidemiological meta-analyses prove they're actively protective against disease, how on earth does an influencer keep convincing millions of rational people that seed oils are evil?
They pivot away from the biology and lean heavily into aesthetic disgust.
Disgust, right.
They utilize what we might call the industrial fallacy. It is the deeply ingrained assumption that if something is processed in a factory or requires heavy machinery to extract, it must inherently be toxic, while anything natural or ancient is inherently safe and pure.
The transcript outlines exactly how the influencer deploys this tactic. They try to gross out the audience by showing a montage of how canola oil is manufactured. The voiceover sounds incredibly ominous.
Like a horror movie.
Exactly. They say, look at this unnatural process. It takes 70,000 tiny seeds just to make one single tablespoon of oil. They wash it with chemicals, they bleach it, they use massive steam injections just to remove the terrible odor.
It's pure theater.
And worst of all, the Canadian government used this exact same oil as an engine lubricant for their naval ships during World War II.
Which is a spectacular cascade of classic logical fallacies designed to elicit an emotional reaction, not a rational one.
Right. Let's break those down. First of all, who cares how many seeds it takes? How many individual grapes does it take to press one single bottle of wine?
A lot.
Does anyone sit around terrified of drinking a Cabernet because it took a lot of grapes to make it? It's an utterly meaningless metric.
And regarding the chemical processing, they are intentionally obfuscating standard chemistry. When they say chemicals, they're usually referring to hexane.
Which is what exactly?
It's a solvent used to extract the maximum amount of oil from the seed pulp. Hexane sounds scary, but it is highly volatile, meaning it completely evaporates when heated. The final cooking oil contains virtually zero hexane.
And the steam injection they find so horrifying.
It's simply a process called deodorization.
Why do they have to deodorize it? Is it rotting?
Not at all. Raw, unrefined seed oils contain natural volatile compounds and free fatty acids that have strong, often bitter flavors and low smoke points. By passing hot steam through the oil under a vacuum, those volatile compounds are safely evaporated away, leaving a perfectly neutral tasting oil with a high smoke point that is safe for cooking at high temperatures. It is a purification process, not a toxification process.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The World War II argument. This is where the hypocrisy reaches its absolute peak.
It really does.
The influencer screams that because canola oil was used to lubricate metal gears on a ship, it must be toxic to human biology. But the transcript points out a deeply inconvenient historical fact. During the 19th century, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, what were the primary industrial lubricants used for heavy machinery, trains, and factory gears?
Beef tallow and pig lard?
Beef tallow and pig lard.
Exactly. If the mere fact that a substance was historically used as an industrial mechanical lubricant permanently renders it unfit for human consumption, then the very carnivore diet advocates making this argument must immediately cease eating all beef and pork fat.
The hypocrisy is just staggering. This influencer promotes a heavy meat, carnivore-adjacent diet. They call the process of pressing seeds in a factory gross and deeply unnatural. Have they ever actually looked at the realities of industrial meatpacking?
Probably not closely.
The CA-TFO's concentrated animal feeding operations, cramming thousands of animals into concrete warehouses, the automated slaughterhouses, the chemical washes used on the meat. There is absolutely nothing natural or ancestral about modern high-yield industrial meat production.
And if we pivot to the environmental impact and resource efficiency, the transcript notes that canola oil is a marvel of agricultural sustainability.
How efficient is it?
A single acre of a canola crop produces roughly 400 liters of usable oil. It is a completely renewable, highly efficient energy resource derived from a flowering plant.
And what about the waste?
The process yields zero waste. The leftover seed meal after the oil is extracted is highly nutritious and is subsequently used to feed livestock, which ironically subsidizes and brings down the cost of the very beef the influencer loves to consume.
It's an incredibly efficient agricultural system. But as we've seen, the influencer isn't interested in nuance, chemistry, or agricultural economics. They want clear-cut villains, and they want geographic anomalies to prove their point.
Which brings us to the geographic data manipulation.
This is honestly my favorite section of the entire transcript. The Japan paradox.
Yes. When the evolutionary biology and the historical timelines fail, the influencer attempts to use the nation of Japan as the ultimate, undeniable, modern-day proof of their theory.
The influencer puts up a graphic and says, look at Japan. They have the highest average national IQ in the entire world, sitting at a remarkable 106. Why is this? Because their traditional diet revolves around consuming a massive amount of raw fish, bursting with brain-building DHA, and they completely avoid unnatural, brain-shrinking seed oils.
Boom. The theory is proven in the real world, right?
Exactly. It sounds incredibly compelling until you actually examine the global demographic and dietary data. What's fascinating here is how rapidly cherry-picked data completely disintegrates when you zoom out the lens just a little bit.
The Haircafe transcript absolutely dismantles this Japan argument by bringing other nations into the comparison.
Let's hear it.
If we accept the premise that eating massive amounts of fish directly creates a high national IQ, let's look at the nation of Portugal. The average Portuguese citizen consumes a staggering 13 kilograms more fish per capita every single year than the average Japanese citizen.
Okay, 13 kilograms more. So if DHA equals intelligence, Portugal must be a nation of super geniuses. Their average IQ must be off the charts, like 120, right?
Portugal's average national IQ is 93.
Oh, that completely breaks the trend line.
It does. Let's look at another example. The nation of Cambodia. The average Cambodian citizen eats roughly the exact same amount of fish per year as the average Japanese citizen. Their DHA intake is nearly identical.
And their IQ.
Cambodia's average IQ is 97. If we look at the Inuit populations of the Arctic, their traditional diet consists almost entirely of wild, DHA-rich seafood and marine mammals, generation after generation. Their average IQ is recorded at 91.
So when you actually look at the data across multiple countries, fish consumption has absolutely zero statistical correlation with national IQ averages.
None whatsoever. The reason Japan possesses a high average IQ score is not because of the molecular structure of sashimi. It is because Japan is a highly developed post-industrial nation with an incredibly robust, culturally revered, rigorously demanding, and heavily funded public education system that trains its citizens from an early age in the exact type of abstract problem-solving that IQ tests measure.
But wait, it gets even better. The ultimate delicious irony of the Japan argument is revealed in the transcript. The influencer loudly claims that Japan is incredibly smart, specifically because they inherently avoid toxic seed oils.
But the transcript pulls the actual dietary data.
It reveals that the nation of Japan actually consumes the largest per capita amount of sesame seed oil in the entire world.
Yes. Sesame oil is not a modern aberration for them. It has been deeply embedded in their traditional culinary practices for centuries.
They absolutely love seed oils. They cook with it constantly. So the influencer specifically chose to highlight the country that eats the most seed oil on the planet to prove their theory that seed oils make you dumb.
You literally cannot make this level of poor research up.
It represents a staggering level of confirmation bias. They started with their conclusion seed oils are bad, fish is good, and simply scanned the globe looking for any single data point that seemed to fit, completely ignoring the reality of the Japanese diet.
Exactly.
Okay, you have to take a breath here. We have systematically, molecularly, and historically debunked the heart disease claims, the 2-point IQ drop, the weird Lamarckian evolutionary biology, the entirely fabricated aquatic ape theory, and the incredibly sloppy geographic data manipulation.
The scientific consensus is overwhelmingly clear. Seed oils are not poison.
So the biggest, most pressing question left for us is why does this highly specific misinformation spread so fast and so wide? How does a YouTube video riddled with so many easily disprovable factual errors amass millions of views and successfully convince normal, rational people to radically, obsessively change their daily diets?
To understand the mechanics of that virality, we have to look critically at the modern misinformation ecosystem itself. The transcript introduces a brilliant, highly applicable concept coined by an Italian software engineer named Alberto Brandolini.
Oh, Brandolini's law.
Yes. Or, more colloquially, the bullshit asymmetry principle.
The bullshit asymmetry principle. I love that. What is the exact definition?
Brandolini's law states that the amount of energy and effort required to definitively refute nonsense is an order of magnitude larger than the energy required to produce it in the first place.
Oh, wow. That makes terrifyingly perfect sense. Think about it. It takes a charismatic influencer exactly 10 seconds to hold up a plastic bottle of canola oil, point at the camera, and say, this exact liquid was used to lubricate World War II tanks. Therefore, it is toxic, unnatural sludge that is actively shrinking your brain.
10 seconds.
That takes 10 seconds. But it takes us, and the creator of the source transcript, over an hour of deep diving into the history of the 19th century Industrial Revolution, the biochemistry of enzyme desaturases, and massive epidemiological meta-analyses just to prove why that specific 10-second claim is fundamentally misleading.
Exactly. The influencer playbook relies entirely on exploiting this asymmetry. They understand that the algorithm rewards engagement, not accuracy. They don't need to be biologically correct. They just need to be fast, highly charismatic, visually slick, and most importantly, they need to induce fear.
We see exactly how they operate throughout this transcript. They cherry-pick single, highly obscure studies that seem to fit their terrifying narrative while ignoring the mountain of evidence that contradicts them.
Let's look at a prime example of that cherry picking. There was that one specific study the influencer aggressively cited about mothers eating high amounts of linoleic acid, claiming it resulted in their babies having physically smaller brains.
Right. The creator of the Haircafe transcript actually pulled the original study and looked at the methodology. It turns out it was based on evaluating 1-month-old infants. There were 0 controlled diets.
0.
The researchers simply asked the exhausted new mothers to fill out a memory-based questionnaire trying to recall exactly what they ate during pregnancy.
Which is notoriously unreliable.
And the kicker, The transcript found that many of the babies in the smaller brain cohort were actually actively drinking formula. The study was completely methodologically useless for proving any sort of chemical causation regarding seed oils.
It was a deeply flawed epidemiological snapshot, not a controlled biological experiment. But the influencer doesn't care about the methodology. They simply flash the terrifying headline of the paper on the screen for 3 seconds, confidently say the science proves it, and immediately move on to the next scary claim.
They completely ignore the massive, rigorously controlled, systematic reviews that show the exact opposite.
And the transcript points out a much darker systemic truth about the modern scientific publishing industry. Today, if you have enough money and an agenda, you can find a pay-to-publish, low-tier medical journal willing to support almost any wild claim you want to make.
Right. The transcript brought up that fascinating context from an article in The Atlantic. It discussed how political figures, specifically citing RFK Jr. during his Senate hearings, can hold up a physical, printed, supposedly peer-reviewed paper claiming a direct link between vaccines and autism.
Even though the broader scientific community knows the paper is fraudulent.
Yes, the methodology is garbage, and the journal itself is a fringe, predatory, pay-to-play operation. To the average layperson watching on television, it looks like authoritative science. It has the aesthetic of truth.
It creates a powerful illusion of credibility. It weaponizes the aesthetic of academia against the public.
It really makes me reflect on how incredibly easy it is to be fooled by this stuff. I mean, we are all deeply susceptible to it.
We are.
When an incredibly fit, charismatic person on YouTube puts up a very clean, professional-looking, high-definition graph showing a stark red line for seed oil consumption going up and a blue line for global obesity going up right next to it, our brains desperately want to connect them.
We are biologically wired to be pattern-seeking machines. We see two things happen at the same time, and we assume one caused the other.
It is a deeply ingrained evolutionary heuristic. But as the transcript brilliantly points out, you could draw that exact same aggressively upward trending line for global meat consumption or global refined sugar consumption, or the adoption of automobiles, or even the proliferation of cell phones over that exact same 50-year time period.
They all perfectly correlate with the rise in obesity. But correlation does not imply causation.
So for you, the learner listening to this right now, what is the ultimate takeaway? How do you practically protect yourself from falling victim to the bullshit asymmetry principle when you're just trying to figure out what to cook for dinner?
It requires a conscious, active vigilance. First, it is important to validate your desire to learn. Wanting to optimize your health is a noble goal.
Absolutely.
But I must warn you that engaging with true scientific research is not the same as watching a highly edited 10-minute YouTube video that perfectly confirms your existing biases and anxieties. True scientific literacy requires seeking out systematic reviews.
Right, looking at the big picture.
It requires relying on meta-analyses, which sit at the absolute pinnacle of the evidence pyramid because they aggregate all the available data, meticulously smoothing out the statistical noise and the anomalies of single flawed studies.
So when you encounter a new dietary panic, ask yourself a fundamental question. Is this person attempting to explain a highly complex, multivariable biological system, or are they simply selling me a convenient single villain?
It is so incredibly tempting to want a simple villain. It is so much easier, so much more psychologically comforting to say, the canola oil in this salad dressing is the sole reason I feel sluggish and overweight.
Rather than doing the hard work of looking holistically at your chronic sleep deprivation, your baseline stress levels, your overall caloric intake, your lack of cardiovascular exercise, and your genetic predispositions.
The simplest, most emotionally satisfying answer is almost universally the wrong one when it comes to human biology.
Okay, let's summarize the immense amount of ground we've covered today. Based on the rigorous, deeply researched debunking provided by our source transcript, we can confidently state that seed oils are not an unnatural alien poison sent by the industrial food complex to shrink our brains and plunge society into an idiocracy.
Not at all.
They are an incredibly efficient, renewable, and highly sustainable agricultural source of essential fatty acids. The specific molecules they contain, particularly linoleic acid, are so profoundly crucial to basic human neurological development that the FDA strictly mandates their inclusion in baby formula so it can successfully mimic human breast milk.
And historically, the widespread introduction of polyunsaturated fats into the modern diet has coincided not with an explosion of sudden disease, but with a massive documented reduction in age-adjusted heart disease mortality.
And a historic, century-long 30-point rise in global IQ scores.
The underlying cellular biology is clear, the epidemiological data is robust, the panic is entirely manufactured.
But as we close out this deep dive, I want to hand it over to you. Because looking at all this, the manipulated data, the invented evolutionary histories, the sheer amount of mental energy people are expending obsessing over the exact molecular composition of cooking oil, it feels like something much deeper than just a disagreement over nutrition.
It does. It reaches a level of cultural fervor that transcends biology, and it leaves us with a final, provocative thought to mull over, something not explicitly stated in the source, but heavily implied by the sheer scale of the panic.
What's that?
We have to ask ourselves, are we increasingly utilizing nutrition as a modern, secular religion? We live in a world that feels increasingly chaotic, unpredictable, and frankly, terrifying.
We cannot control the economy, we cannot control global politics, and we certainly cannot control our own eventual mortality.
But controlling precisely what goes into our bodies gives us a powerful illusion of total control over our destiny. We begin to divide food into rigid categories of sin and salvation.
In this modern theology, seed oils become the literal devil.
And unpasteurized raw milk becomes the holy water. But we must ask, what happens when our obsessive, rigid quest for this imagined, pristine, perfectly ancestral diet actually causes us more profound psychological stress, isolation, and anxiety than the physical food itself could ever cause biologically?
Wow.
If you find yourself sitting in a restaurant absolutely terrified, experiencing a spike in cortisol because you suspect the chef might have used a tablespoon of soybean oil in the vinaigrette, is that rigid dietary ideology actually making you healthier?
Or has the pursuit of perfect health simply become a new, socially acceptable form of psychological torture?
The stress of orthorexia, the obsession with eating perfectly, might ultimately be far more toxic to your body and your mind than the linoleic acid ever could be.
That is incredibly profound, something very real to chew on next time you open your pantry or scroll through your feed. Thank you so much for joining us on this intense, complex, and illuminating journey today. Stay curious, keep critically questioning the algorithm, and most importantly, keep diving deep.